Markets Now is brought to you by the 5-year anniversary of Brevant Seeds. Here's to 5 years of not just winning, but collecting one game-changing W after another. See all of our wins at brevant.com/wins.
Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Brook with Arlan Suderman of StoneX. Well, a mostly higher day in grain and livestock futures trade on Monday in Arlan. It was really pushed, especially the rally in soybeans, by maybe some hopes of some China business, maybe a China deal. But is the market getting ahead of itself, or did it?
Yeah, I think to some extent it did, but I really can't blame a speculative trader if they see that comment from President Trump challenging China to buy more soybeans. I can't blame him for covering some short positions because maybe he knows something. Maybe we're getting close. The end user for extending coverage, same reason. I can't blame him for doing that. I think maybe we would have been higher anyway in just positioning for the USDA report, covering some short positions, but it certainly did amplify the move, especially in the soybean complex, while also providing some support for corn and wheat as well.
Absolutely. Now, we did not get any confirmation, though, of China business in the commercial market, did we?
Didn't see any confirmation of that. China does have enough infrastructure within the system that they can kind of buy some under the cover, but we see no evidence of it. And it's unlikely that they did. And the fact that President Trump, according to CNBC, signed an executive order extending the suspension of the high tariffs another 90 days indicates to me we're probably not close to a deal involving commodities yet. I think the bottom line, though, is ag is back on the radar. Ag is back on the radar in the negotiations, and I do think that is a positive sign.
Okay, so we extend the trade truce for 90 days. So you say that'll allow us time to work on a deal. But are we still in jeopardy of missing our export window because China is still buying Brazilian beans?
Yeah, another 90 days takes us to November. And trade deals usually tend to wait till the last minute for leverage against the clock. So this is not a good sign for getting a deal signed that's going to impact soybean trade. If you look at soybeans that China's books on the books right now, they usually are very active booking new crop soybeans in the summertime for delivery. As we harvest those beans, immediately load them on a boat and start them across the water. They have zero on the books right now. You say, well, maybe that's on the unknown destinations. Sales to unknown destinations is among the lowest in recent years. And other nations are now using that field as well. So I'm not very encouraged at all about that on the export front, and particularly when USDA says that its estimated ending stocks of soybean surplus stocks at the end of the marketing year, at the end of this month, will be twice what they bought for us this year, from us this year, at least very close to twice that level. So I hope they buy, but right now it's not looking very positive.
I was going to say right now, like you said, they haven't bought 1 bushel of new crop beans from the United States. And right now we're a lot cheaper than Brazil, aren't we?
Well, Brazil basis has been firming up because the farmer there doesn't like the price either and isn't selling. So we've been seeing that firming of basis, but they have tremendous number of soybeans heading their way. 12 million metric tons landed in July. I think 11 million metric tons were expected to land this month, 10 or 11 next month, 9 million in October. And then when you look also at the fact that they've been buying soy meal for fall delivery from Argentina, that's their contingency plan right now in case they decide not to buy anything from us.
That's right. The other big news is the WASDE that's coming on tomorrow. Average trade guess on corn, a little over 184 bushels per acre. I know StoneX was up at over 188. But do you think that's already priced into this market?
I think there's a good chance that it is. If you look at when the corn market bottomed out last week and turned around, it really came just as the pre-report estimates came out from the industry. And those industry surveys are asking, what will USDA say in their report? They're not asked, what do you think is the final size of the crop? But nonetheless, it came out around 184.4 bushels per acre. And if you talked to many of the traders, many of the funds that were trading, the yield models that they have created and invested in, they were showing basically 185 to 190 based on the ones that we've seen. And so that indicates we probably priced in a higher yield. The job of the market right now is to focus on the supply of the crop. Price in the supply of the crop until you're comfortable with what that supply is, whatever it may be, high or low. Once the market is comfortable with the supply of the crop, then it can focus on the demand side of the balance sheet. And the way the market's behaving to me suggests that if USDA doesn't exceed the whisper number, which I think is above that 184.4 in Tuesday's report. And then the crop tour, the industry crop tour the following week, as long as it doesn't show anything to indicate it's higher than the whisper number either, then I think the trade will start focusing on the demand side of the balance sheet.
So that implies that August could be the biggest yield number that we get from USDA then.
If you look back at the last 32 years, I dug up the data for the last 32 years going back to 1993. USDA raised its corn yield estimate 17 times in that 32-year period in the month of August. And it's expected now. The lowest trade estimate was still above its July yield estimate, so it's expected to increase it. And I've been saying for years, everyone's been saying for years, big crops get bigger. Well, so then I looked at what was the final yield, and I found that the final yield was higher than the August yield in those years when they raised it in August, only 5 times. It was lower than that August yield 11 times and matched it once. And so USDA, when they raise it in August, have a tendency to overstate the yield and then pull back from that.
Okay, so it's possible we could have put the low in the corn market last week then.
We put the low in mid-August last year and then rallied into February. Will it do the same thing this year? I don't know, but that precedent has been set.
What about corn demand? Does USDA increase that in this report?
I think they're justified increasing it at least another 50 million bushels for old crop in this report. I do not expect an increase in new crop at this point. Although when you look at it, if USDA does come in with a blockbuster yield, the tendency is that big yields cheapen prices and increase demand.
No doubt. Okay, soybeans, average trade guess around 53 bushels per acre. So not a big change there. So is the bigger question about what does USDA do with the demand side of the new crop ledger sheet?
I wouldn't be surprised if they cut their new crop exports, but I don't expect them to do that in this report. And I don't expect any big changes in the yield number in this August report either, since soybeans are really determined. Soybean yields are really determined in August and early September. They may just punt and say, we're going to wait till we actually walk the fields in September before we make much of a change. Now, the yield estimate will come from NASS. So NASS will have a yield estimate based on farmer surveys, crop condition ratings, and on satellite data, but I still am not expecting too much of an increase there.
Right. What about wheat? Because we might see a little increase in production, but will it be offset by demand because exports have been better than a year ago?
Yeah, I think we could see an increase in exports there. And don't be surprised if we see a pare back on maybe spring wheat yields. And then we'll also be looking at the Black Sea, Europe, Baltic area. It's been more of a quality issue than it is for yield. We may, in some cases, we're seeing some production estimates go up, but quality is a problem. And that's one reason hard red winter wheat, the quality hard red winter wheat, has been in greater demand and competitive on the world market to try to blend with some of that lower quality wheat coming out of the Black Sea and parts of Europe. And so that's one reason why we're talking about maybe increasing the export target.
After we get done with the report, I know we have a Friday meeting coming up with President Trump, with President Putin. Do you think there will be anything done, and what's the end game there?
President Trump will be doing his best negotiating and does his best negotiating face to face, as we've seen with some of the trade deals. It's interesting to note that President Putin was looking for a way out of the war earlier this year until President Xi Jinping of China went to Moscow and visited with him. And then Putin doubled down at the war. China doesn't really want an end to the war, in my opinion, because A, it ties up U.S. military resources, and we cannot pay as much attention to what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. Second of all, if President Putin and President Trump make amends, so to speak, and President Trump's able to give assurances to President Putin that he doesn't have to worry about invasions coming from the West, as he's worried about, whether justifiably or not, then President Putin has reason to start worrying about his aggressive neighbor to the south. President Xi Jinping doesn't want that. The third thing is, if there's a peace agreement, President Trump might be able to access the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. And right now, China controls 90% of the processed rare earth minerals in the world. That is becoming one of the central factors going forward, I think, for shaping the next 50 to 100 years in geopolitical boundaries.
And the cattle market ended a little bit higher on Monday after some pretty wicked reversals on Friday. So how encouraged were you by the action? Because there's a lot of people that were calling tops on Friday.
How many times have we seen that? I've been one of them. But we keep going through this cycle. We get up into very thin air at high altitudes, and everyone gets scared, and we collapse the market. And then the cash market drags us back higher. And I think on Friday it was the board collapse that actually ended up in late week cash trade that was steady in the south and lower in the north. But those levels were so high in the first place. And so now we look at this week, and if we steady the board, I think that cash market could again do its job, but we'll have to see. We're in rare air right now, and we did not get the bearish weekly reversal on the weekly charts, and that's another reason that the bulls are somewhat encouraged.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much for joining us. Arlan Suderman with StoneX, that is Markets Now.
You were right.
You were right.
You were right.
Well, you were right. When you choose your seed brand, there's winning, and then there's...
You were right. Should have gone with Brevant seeds.
When you choose Brevant seeds, you don't just win. You get to be right. Don't just win. Win. Talk with your retailer or visit Brevant.com/win to get started.